Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 68 of season 3 of Brody Sports Talk. My name is Sean Morgan. I am joined by my fellow fantasy friends. They're both my friends, and we are in fantasy leagues together. They are actually real people, and they are not fantasy friends. Like, they're not figments of my imagination. I need to make sure that this is clear and understood. Caleb, Derek, how are you guys doing?
Woo! I think that we are fantastic friends, and we are glad that you have found us here at Brody Sports Talk.
You are my favorite listener, whoever it is out there. You are my favorite. It is a Fantasy Friday. It is one of our favorite episodes where we get to go through, talk about fantasy football, go over some of the studs and duds from I would say kind of a rather frustrating week 3 for a lot of teams, and a couple surprises that maybe caught us off guard. We'll answer some matchup questions that we field on Twitter, as well as make a decision in our podcast league, and then talk through who our sleepers are for the upcoming Week 4 games. But let's get into our respective leagues before we do that. Talk about what's happened. So in our Brody Guillotine League, which if you are not familiar with that, the way that works is whoever scores the lowest in a given week is eliminated from the entire league for the rest of the season. Through week 1 and 2, myself, Derek, Caleb, we all survived, but one of the three Brodies fell during week 3. Let us all take a moment of silence in honor of Derek and his fallen guillotine team. I'm going to count us down from 5. May your team rest in waivers. Actually, they probably, a vast majority of them will rest in waivers. I don't know if you lost too many guys that are going to be scrambled for. I was looking over. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Let's see who we got. And I'm like, I don't know if I have any upgrades that I'm going to, blow the budget on. But I almost got eliminated. I was probably I think 4th or 5th down from the bottom. So it wasn't too good. It wasn't too good. Derek, do you have any thoughts about your unfortunate exit?
So the only people that I would say you should scramble for is maybe a Baker Mayfield, a Cordell Patterson. Everyone else is probably not going to be too big of an upgrade for you. I had fun. I'd never played a guillotine before, and probably will not again. But it was fun while it lasted. I'm not good enough, and I cannot rely on certain players to score enough points. When it's head to head, I can take a bow and be like, okay, yeah, this person now drafted me, or they put together a really good strategy or something like that. When it comes down to the lowest points that week, not my cup of tea.
And I think that's fair. It's definitely a weird environment. I want to talk a little bit about my dynasty league, which as I was so happy last week with a big win, things did not go well for me this week. I ended up losing 156 to 128, as is tradition for me in a lot of fantasy leagues historically. I am currently the top scorer and have conceded the most points to a 1-2 record. Always feels good, right? Always feels good to have conceded the most points. It's just like, okay, well, not a whole heck of a lot you can really do about it. I did, unfortunately, have Christian McCaffrey, who, with leaving early, did kind of suck. I did make a gamble on Sterling Shepard against the Falcons, him leaving at the half due to injury, having only 2 grabs for 16 yards on 3 targets. It did not really work out for me. I did have Zach Moss on the bench, which, quite honestly, in comparison to, what I would have expected, I him being on the bench was, I think, a call that a lot of fantasy managers made. And things just didn't pan out. My opponent had the Broncos defense, 2 interceptions, 5 sacks. That scored some points. He also had Zeke, who had a fantastic game, and he had Cooper Kupp. What am I going to do? Like, even with some amazing performances from, I had Brady, Mike Evans, and Keenan Allen combined for about 19 points a pop. Chris Carson had a good game in my flex spot. Just, McCaffrey killed it. Killed it, and Sterling Shepard killed it for me. So, week 4, we'll see if I can do a little bit better. So, finally, let's talk about the podcast league. I'll leave that one up to Caleb.
So the better news in the podcast league is that we found a way to trade for Antonio Gibson. So we do have him instead of literally scrambling for anyone and everyone to play running back every week. Probably going to be him and Javonte Williams for the foreseeable future, so you won't have me asking about like random other dudes at running back every week, because that was rough. And getting Gibson, we put up the 3rd most points in the league this week, and we went up against the team that scored the most. Similar to what Sean was saying, they had Herbert, Zeke Elliott, Saquon, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and the Browns defense. So it was a horrible game to go up against them. We were both winless going into that one. And that is the Oblivion Bar podcast, which is not a sports podcast, if you want to check them out. I've seen that they actually were created for a store called the Fantasy Store in St. Charles, Missouri, where you can buy comics and board games. And it sounds like a place that we would actually all really like to hang out at. So, kudos to the Oblivion Bar podcast. I'm planning on listening to their Loki review later, because I like listening to podcasts, and I've actually finished that series because I almost never am up to date on anything like that. So if you're into that sci-fi fantasy type of thing, check out the Oblivion Bar podcast. They're some cool dudes.
It's a good plug. Let's talk about our studs and duds. Guys that did well, and guys that, well, they fell flat on their face. Derek, let's go ahead and start with you. Who was your stud of week 3, and who was your not so stud of week 3?
So, my stud of the week, Mike Williams for the Chargers. 7 receptions, 122 yards, 2 touchdowns. Looking good doing it. So, he was a really nice player this week. My dud, which has been a dud for the entire season thus far, is Jonathan Taylor. He had 10 rushes for 64 yards. He is my RB1, or was my RB1. He's just not living up to the hype preseason.
That's a bummer. I think he's just a casualty of a Colts offense that has really just struggled in so many different areas and can't string together a decent set of performances. Caleb, who was your stud and dud of the week?
So my stud is Josh Allen. He went out, was insane. 358 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns, and a rush touchdown. 9 rushing yards, just to add a little bit of extra in there. They obliterated the football team, so I was really happy to see how Josh Allen was able to do that. My dud of the week comes from the Chicago Bears and how horrible they were. My dud is David Montgomery, as he just was terrible. It was very disappointing to see what he wasn't able to do. I don't even remember his stat line. Just, it was bad. The Bears didn't score any touchdowns. They only had, I think, 40-something total yards of offense. So do you really need to know that he probably did worse than that? Let me find the official line here. Okay, so 10 catches for or 10 rushes for 34 yards, 2 receptions for 21 yards. So that sounds very Jonathan Taylor-esque.
Honestly.
Uh, all right. Well, so for me, studs and duds. Let's start with the dud first. Sterling Shepard. I mean, I know that I kind of sort of called this on myself, right? With saying, you know what, Shepard's done so well, through the first 2 weeks. He's things are happening for that offense. I mean, for handling, 90+% of snap counts, 9 grabs game 1, 10 grabs game 2, almost 100-yard plus performances, and he comes out 2 grabs on 3 targets, 16 yards, and then is done by the end of the first half. So he actually is one of the reasons why I think I lost so much this week in all of my different leagues, is because I was high on Shepard, heading into a very favorable matchup, and then it just did not manifest. It sucked. My stud of the week, even though they weren't the highest scoring defense, they still put up very impressive numbers, and that's going to be the Cleveland Browns. So if you are in a league where you're starting a defense versus having a individual defensive player, the Browns got 9 sacks. That's pretty good. That is pretty good. They were just a stifling set of beasts, and the Bears could do absolutely nothing. I know that people have been relatively high on the Browns defensively, but I think this game really solidified that, they are going to consistently be one of the higher scoring defenses in fantasy. Let's talk about our surprises of the week, and we'll then answer a couple matchup questions. For me, I'll go ahead and start. Zach Moss continues to impress. Increased snap count. Devin Singletary. I know, and it's really hard to look at the Bills, stable of running backs as anything but consistent for fantasy. But I do believe we're starting to see the transition away from Singletary and more toward Moss. I feel like he's a better, more consistent threat, both running the ball and in the red zone. And the fact that he's continuously eating up some of the snap counts that generally were split a little more evenly with him and Singletary means that, writing could be on the wall. We could see a legitimate RB3, RB2 threat from Moss, who is mostly just kind of a bench filler or kind of a dynasty stash for a lot of people. Still, jury is maybe out for another couple of weeks, but, it's definitely a player to keep an eye on. Caleb, what about you?
My fantasy surprise was not nearly as happy. It was Juju Smith-Schuster, probably staying close to the dud-like range here. It was 3 catches for 25 yards. In general, Steelers, I've already talked about how disappointing they were. Yeah, that was disappointing. When Deontay Johnson is out, I figured he was going to get fed more targets and not have literally every potential pass thrown to Najee Harris. Not quite literally, but pretty much. Eric, who did you have as your fantasy surprise?
So before we talk about my surprise, I just want the listeners to know that the reason why Sean lost to me this week in fantasy football was because of Sterling Shepard. If Sterling could have got you an additional 63.1 points, then you would have beat me. But who knows what that second half could have.
I know, right? It could have been crazy. It could have been absolutely crazy.
Yeah, I mean, just touchdowns all over the place. And so I'm going to go into the Bears Browns game. Before I go into I make sidetracks here. I'm so glad the Broncos didn't take Justin Fields and took Patrick Surtain. Just all the Broncos fans can just get off of it. Now we saw what he would do with a unstable offense. So yeah, when Fields was named the starter, I thought Allen Robinson was going to get some touches, was going to get some catches, going to make some touchdowns because Justin Fields was going to sling it all over the field. He had 2 catches for 27 yards, and Allen Robinson is a dud of the week, but also quite surprising that he had such low numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was a very up and down week for a lot of fantasy stalwarts, or players that we were expecting to at least contribute in meaningful ways. Let's answer a couple of matchup questions, and then we'll talk about our sleepers of week 4. Caleb, this is your segment. Please take it away.
So the first one we got was from one of our fellow podcasts on Twitter, Fourth and Long Radio. Their Twitter handle is Fourth Long Radio. And they were asking Ryan Tannehill at the Jets or Kirk Cousins versus the Browns. Sean, let's go to you for an initial take on this one.
I mean, I think you go with Tannehill against the Jets. One of the things that, and it's kind of weird, right? Because, well, actually, you know what? I just talked myself out of it. I think Cousins against the Browns is going to be a bit more intriguing. There's probably a very strong expectation that Tennessee is going to go out to an earlier lead. So even though I think Tannehill will put up a very respectable line against the Jets, probably in the neighborhood of maybe like 19 for 25, 18 for 26, 2 touchdowns, no picks, maybe like 240, 250 yards. This is a team that gets the job done running the football, and they're probably going to consistently do that, burn down the clock, eat away at that lead. The yardage could increase, maybe on some big plays, but I would expect this is going to be a much more conservative offensive approach. Whereas, the Vikings and Browns game is going to be about gunslinging. I do think Cousins probably has the riskier line, especially if you're concerned about turnovers. But I think the point ceiling is much higher. And if it's the difference in a comfortable, like let's say, prediction-wise, you're matching up against somebody that's about even with you, I think that if you make a gamble on Kirk Cousins, then it could pay off tremendously or it could backfire tremendously. Tannehill's the safer play, but if you need to maybe you're going up against right now the best roster, one of the best rosters in your league, Cousins could prove to be that extra edge, in my opinion.
I agree with Sean on everything, up to and including Tannehill at the Jets having a better week. I think that I will take the known versus the unknown.
I think I'm actually going to side with Tannehill, and I think that it's somewhat in part of Titans have played in some close games the last few weeks, and I think that they might want to put their foot on the gas, even if they're up, let's say, 24-7 at the half. They might come out and try to still get another 2 or 3 touchdowns in the second half. I don't think they're going to necessarily care if they need to be timid with their game plan. They might actually want to let Ryan eat when it's okay if he makes a little bit of a mistake because the game isn't so close. So compared to some of their early matchups like with the Seahawks and the Colts, I think that Ryan's going to go out and feast a little bit on this. So it's a bit of a split decision. I can see why Kirk might be the better option. But I will say that Cleveland defensive line versus that Minnesota offensive line,
it's scary.
It really has me limiting some of what Minnesota will do. Also, I'm nervous of how that will look if Dalvin Cook is out again this week. They were able to manage with Alexander Madison against the Seahawks.
Madison looks good.
The Seahawks defense is making a lot of people look really good. So, yeah, I think Cleveland's defense is one that you might just try to avoid fantasy players against this year. Which good for Cleveland. I mean, I didn't see that coming before the
I
season.
know.
Let's go to the next one.
Yeah, what's the next one?
So this one is two choices for Twitter user JBO Dems DEMZ. So it's a half PPR league, and so we have a running back choice and a receiver choice. The running back choice is Sony Michel or David Montgomery, and the wide receiver choice is Devonta Smith or Rondale Moore. So we're going to go ahead and do this as a combo. And I'm going to go ahead and just jump off here first. I'm going to take Sony Michel because I already told you how frustrated I was by David Montgomery. And I really think that having someone in the Rams offense just gives you so much more potential for finding the end zone than having anyone in the Bears offense. Yes, they're playing the Lions. No, I don't care. As far as Smith and Moore, I'm curious to see what's going to happen with the Eagles after this short week. I do think that Moore could be used because the Cardinals and Rams are playing each other. So, if anything, I'm leaning towards Devonta Smith. I think that Smith and the Eagles is probably the smarter choice there. But I don't inherently love either side of that one as much as I do Sony Michel. Derek, what do you think about that?
So if our listeners listen to our Rams episode, they know how I feel about Sonny Michel. I think that I had expected him to come in after his trade and light up that offense, and so I'm taking that side uh, of the choice, and then Devonta Smith for both names are going to go in my book. I'm matching up with Caleb. Sean?
I'm actually going to go the opposite. I'm going to go with
Yep.
Montgomery and Moore. So one of the and this, I promise I'm not trying just to be contrary to you guys, but I want to talk through a couple of things that have me a little bit nervous, specifically about the Rams Cardinals matchup. Uh, the Devonta Smith, I don't know if I really have a lot of faith in the Eagles' ability to execute offensively right now, especially after the travesty that was Monday Night Football against the Cowboys. Even though I know that it's very clear that the Eagles will gladly abandon the run, very much abandon the run. I still don't think that it's in a half PPR league. I don't know. I know that the Cards Rams game is going to be much more of an aired out kind of like close game. And so I think Moore ends up kind of edging Smith out there. I don't really feel like the Rams stable of running backs really gets the amount of attention or effectiveness. This is the Matthew Stafford show. Touchdowns are going to be in the air, and I feel like the Bears have a decent rebound matchup. Even though I do think they lose to the Lions, I think that they're going to be able to establish their offensive rhythm a little bit better than than they were their last game, and I think Montgomery is going to be the primary beneficiary of that. So I have a feeling that Michelle might actually end up posting a bit of a dud this game, even though it could be a reasonably high scoring, something like maybe 11 to 14 carries for under 60 yards. Maybe even under like 40 yards, and I think he's a very touchdown dependent option, whereas I think Montgomery gets a lot more looks.
That's fair. That's fair. And the last one to potentially spoil one of Sean's sleepers here is in our podcast league, which is a half PPR league as well. We have Julio Jones facing the Jets in that matchup we already somewhat talked about, and Brandon Ayuk against the Seahawks. Sean, tell me what you think, and why is the answer Brandon Ayuk?
Why can't we start both? Is there a problem? Like what are our other options? I feel like these are two very good choices, and I need to know what we are making these two very good choices over, because it's the flex spot at our wide receiver 1 and 2. So, because you can answer that for me really quick.
So I am playing Stephon Diggs against Houston
Okay.
because we need to. I feel like he's been disappointing, but he's still Stephon Diggs, and I'm not ready to turn away from him quite yet. And I have Odell Beckham Jr. against Minnesota in the second wide receiver spot because he came back. They fed him quite a bit last week. Um, had a solid number, whereas Julio has at least been more inconsistent. And of course, just to clarify it, running back we're playing Gibson and Javonte Williams because no one wants to play Mark Ingram. Because yeah,
And oh wow, I just realized that the podcast league just has one flex spot. That
Yep.
is This is an awful decision. Why? I don't like any of this. This is tough. Uh, I almost want to pull for Ayuk here because I feel like, especially against the Seahawks, who have proven to be very vulnerable in the secondary, that he's going to have a big game. But man, it's so hard to say. You know what? Yeah, let's not take Jones against the Jets, the Jones Jets. I don't
Derek,
know. I don't like Derek. Please answer for me. I actually don't know.
JJ at Jets.
Derek sounding quite certain of which way he goes there. I think part of what surprises me is it says that the Jets are allowing the fourth fewest points to opposing wide receivers, and I believe that that is also called the run on the Jets, have a lead, continue to run on the Jets game plan.
Which is
So
weird, right? Because then, it goes back to what I said about Tannehill and Cousins. Just thought that's kind of, you know.
I mean, that's
I
at least what has happened, I think.
I'm also leaning a little bit more toward Jones. If anything, I think Ayuk has been a somewhat disappointment. And I do have him, spoiler alert, as my fantasy sleeper. And I think that it's more of a feeling comfortable with him in like a two flex role, or if, like maybe you have like a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 that you're not sure about. I think this is the time to bring Ayuk off the bench. But this is I forgot that in the podcast league we went with a very like wide receiver, like tight end premium, and it makes these types of decisions much more difficult.
I will say that Jones was a little bit banged up last week, so I'll be keeping an eye on the injury report and might circle a message around late Saturday or something and
Yeah.
be like, "Hey, where are we at now?" But it's definitely a close call. Uh, so let's go ahead and switch over to the fantasy sleepers. Uh, I'm talking. I'll just keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say, I already gave away mine, so
Yeah, yours. Sean's was Brandon Ayuk. Spoiler alert. Mine is Cordero Patterson. I don't know what it is about why people are ranking Cordero Patterson the way they are. I think the 3 game sample size is enough to say that Arthur Smith is going to use him. Whether or not I think that that's a great choice, he's continuing to use him. I was looking in one of the leagues that I had that Cordero Patterson is available in, and it said that he was 8th of all running backs in terms of fantasy points this year. When I was looking at where people were ranking him, as far as like running back rankings for this week, they had him at 32. I think that in general, people just don't trust Cordero Patterson and his availability. I'm not going to sit here and say, "Oh yeah, the Falcons are going to score so many points." I mean, they put up 17 on the Giants. But I think Cordell Patterson is going to continue to get touches and continue to get yards. And I'm kind of excited for what he's going to be able to do this week.
I mean, it's weird, right? Because I've got him pulled up, and I'm looking at like his last 5 years against the Bucks. That's the most fantasy points that he scored in the last 5 years. So I really do think that this change in offensive scheme really has benefited him, and especially if you're in like a full PPR league, he's a top 10 running back in full PPR right now. So it's about to get to the point where he's no longer a sleeper and is now a very decent short term like win now option that I'm looking right. It shows on Sleeper 64% rostered. And there's a chance you could pick him up right now.
Derek, who is your fantasy sleeper for the week?
So this is not much of a sleeper because everyone knows about him, but it's Jameis Winston. If you have him, you should start him. If he's a bench player for you, and you don't have a top 3 quarterback points, he's probably going to be a top 5 points for QB this week versus the Giants. I think that the Saints have a plan, and he's going to throw 4 or 5 touchdowns. I feel great about Jameis Winston this week.
Wow,
that's pretty strong words. I like it. I think that the weird thing about the Saints for me is that it always seems like there's like 1 or 2 players that end up like scoring really exceptionally well, almost at the expense of everybody else. And
why don't you just call out Alvin Kamara and go ahead and put that on me, Sean? Just be like, hey, Alvin Kamara's not going to score this week. It's going to be Jameis Winston.
Hey, Alvin Kamara's not going to score as much this week. It's going to be Jameis Winston. Is that what you wanted to hear? Is that good? Yeah. Well, that is actually it for our Fantasy Friday. If you liked some of what we said, please let us know on our various social media platforms. We are on Facebook. We are on Twitter. You can also respond to any and all that Caleb posts on Twitter, regardless of whether it's about this episode or not. He's always happy to entertain and be entertained. If you have the option of leaving us a review, a comment, anything at all on whatever platform you listen to us on, whether that be a like media platform through your computer, through your phone, if you watch us on YouTube, whatever the case is, please give us those reviews, give us those ratings, give us that feedback. We love it. We want to take it all in. And that's going to wrap it up. On behalf of Caleb and Derek, my name is Sean. We are Brody Sports Talk. We are signing out. We will be back with you on Saturday for our Pigskin Picks. Have a good one, everybody.
Bye, guys.
See ya.